the thing in the cornfield, and the clock stopped. The town clock stopped at noon on a Tuesday, and the sound of the world thinned as if someone had pinched a violin string until it went mute. Jonah felt it first as a small, private wrongness, the way a familiar song skips a note. He drove home because his name was on the deed now, and because the corn had always been the thing he could measure a day by. Planting, sun, harvest. A stopped clock made the corn look like a bruise. By the time Jonah pulled into the gravel, neighbors had already thinned from porches, lingering like ghosts who had misplaced their exits. The farmhouse smelled of oil and old bread. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall, but its ticks had a hollow tone. He opened his father's toolbox and found the pocket watch wrapped in an old handkerchief, warm, impossibly clean. It did not move. Neither did the hands of the town clock visible over the field. At dusk, he walked the edge of the field. The corn rose like a small forest, the stalks whispering secrets to one another. He learned the rows as a child and thought he knew their grammar, but tonight they felt arranged, deliberate, almost conversational. When he paused, the rustle obeyed him, a soft hush that matched the heartbeat in his throat. A scarecrow leaned on a broken post, its buttoned eye catching the last light. Something was pinned to its chest. He stepped closer and read the face of the watch nailed to straw, frozen at 12. It mirrored the tower like a bad joke. His own watch in his pocket shivered when he touched the pinned one, a wife-thin vibration that made him look over his shoulder. There was a thumping in the earth that was almost music, like a foot falling in time with a heart. He told himself it was mice, wind, anything reasonable. The field kept its face folded. The town had stories. Mara, who lived 2 houses down and who cleared rain gutters for a living, would neither laugh nor lie about them. She said the field kept score. It asked questions in the tilt of stalks and rewarded answers with silence. People who stayed up all night swore they heard their names called like leaves. Jonah accepted the tale as the kind of small superstition that kept porch lights on. Yet, every superstition had a date it became fact, and noon had become that date. He took the pinned watch home and set it beside the brass clockwork he had carried up into the tower earlier that week. The latter smelled of dust and paint, the gears of the town clock like sleeping insects. When he pried the back off his father's watch, there was a single kernel of corn trapped inside the movement, small, amber, impossibly dry. The clock's teeth caught on it and shivered. Jonah stared at the seed until the morning blurred. That night, he dreamed a slow thing, the clock hands melting like wax, and the rows of corn stretching long as hallways, doors opening where leaves parted. He woke to a sound like someone sorting stones downstairs. The house seemed larger, rooms rearranged. Sometimes time did not so much stop as ask for directions, and then forget them. Jonah found himself checking his pocket because he wanted the watch to be a promise he could keep. He began returning to the field at odd hours before dawn, after dinner, tracking the way the shadows fell between the rows. The corn seemed to rearrange itself around him, paths that had been there gone, new clearings opening like invitations. Once he found a patch where the air felt colder, where his breath drew white, and in that hollow the watch on his wrist ticked loud and alone, each beat loud as a knuckle on wood. People in town started arriving late and leaving early, as if the day had rerouted itself around a pothole. Meetings dissolved into long silences. Mara told him about a grandmother who used to sew thread through the hems of clothes, so the field couldn't pull a person across time. Jonah laughed when she said it, and then felt the laugh hang, thread-like, in his mouth. The watch warmed in his palm, and the hands trembled, then stilled again as if embarrassed. He decided to set the town clock himself. It felt like repairing grammar. At midnight, he climbed the tower with the watch in one pocket and a coil of rope in the other. Wind shoved at the shutters and made the bell whine like an old throat. He set the gears, turned the hands forward with a careful patience, and for a heart-stuttering moment, the town below exhaled as if someone had released breath they were saving. As the clock resumed, something in the field answered like a struck bell, but not in sound. The rows parted, and a shape stepped into the thin moonlight, lank and wrong in proportion, like a scarecrow grown into a person. Jonah felt the world tighten around the moment. He expected terror, a scream, some final reveal. Instead, the figure stood and watched him with the patience of old timber, as if it had simply been waiting for its turn in the day's rotation. He left the field at dawn with the watch heavy in his pocket and a new carefulness in his step. Days passed, and the clock kept time, but sometimes it hiccuped like a bad engine. The watch would stop for a minute, reset, then run on as if nothing had happened. Jonah stopped telling himself tidy explanations. He began to listen for the small sounds, stalks whispering like pages, distant footsteps that faded when he turned, the faint, polite tick of a thing that liked to be asked properly. Mara knocked on his door one evening and handed him a length of red thread wound on a spool. "There are ways to live with it," she said, "not fix it." She tied one end to the farmhouse door and the other to Jonah's watch, and said to pull when he felt the field's patience thinning. When he did, the spool spun like a compass, and the field answered in a little sigh, as if someone had moved a chair. The town learned to live around pauses, keeping bread on tables and curtains drawn just so. Still, at night, the field kept asking. Sometimes Jonah thought it wanted names, sometimes favors, sometimes only to be acknowledged. He would sit by the window with the watch on his lap and count seconds, breaths, the ticks of the kitchen clock, and he would imagine the field's patient mind arranging his answers like seeds in a row. The more he answered, the less certain he was which questions belonged to him. The clock did not care which way he walked. It only wanted to be believed. Time kept looping around its small, polite cruelties. People nodded at one another with new wariness. The town's rhythms gained a softness, like paper folded and refolded until its edges curl. Jonah kept the watch wound, and the thread knotted. And sometimes, when the clock stopped for reasons he couldn't name, he would walk the rows until the corn seemed to recognize him and part politely. He never solved the question the field asked most clearly, whether it wanted company or simply obedience. When the clock stopped now, he listened for breathing,